we have to remind ourselves that business is human, because business doesn't happen without us. And if we're not taking care of us, how can it happen? Because all the things that you just talked about, like that hustle and that grind and those words, they make my hair stand on end. That, to me, that all leads to burnout. Hustle and grind and 5 a.m. and, burning the candle at both ends. I mean, all of those things, I'm like, well, that's exhausting. That's wearing down who we are, because it's placing our entire value as humans on the doing part, not on the being part.
Hello everyone, this is Kristina Mand-Lakhiani, co-founder of Mind-Valley, and welcome to Honest Conversations. Today I have a wonderful guest. I don't know her very long yet, but the first 2 minutes completely won me over, so I'm excited about this conversation. This is Shelley Paxton. Hello, Shelley.
Hello, Kristina. I know, I already feel like a soul sister. I feel like I know so much more about you than you know about me, so I can't wait for this.
I've flipped through your book, which I got, so I do know a little. So Shelley is author and speaker, and you're a business coach, right? Transformational coach, in fact.
Yep.
And you come from a corporate world. And, as I was flipping through the book, the thing I was thinking about is that we have some very interesting understanding of business and corporate. I think on one side, there is this legacy from the past, from the days when big money started being created, probably end of 19th, beginning of the 20th century, the whole of 20th century, where corporate and business were always and inevitably something about being efficient, being productive, making money, being soulless in a way. And you are talking about bringing soul into that. So how did you make this transition? Because I would imagine that your beginnings in the corporate world were not only in businesses with soul, but also in traditional businesses where it was maybe forgotten. I don't say they're soulless, but maybe some of the businesses have been around for such a long time, and sometimes we forgot how they started and why they started. So how did you make this transition personally?
Yeah, it's a deeply personal story for me, because I spent 26 years in the corporate world. So it wasn't a short period of time. It was a long time. I have zero regrets. It was on some of the most amazing brands. I was in the advertising and marketing space, living around the world, working around the world, and my kind of pinnacle job in the marketing space was as chief marketing officer of Harley Davidson. Ooh. And that's right. I know, it's like the sexiest job in the marketing world. People would like cut off their arm to be a part of that. And here's what ended up happening for me. So I kind of knew that, like, I was doing my corporate career in my own rebel way. I didn't take traditional jobs in traditional places. I went to live in Istanbul, Turkey, which I loved. I went to live in Shanghai, China. I, was able to represent these incredible brands all over the world. And I did a lot of work here in the States. And for me, I kind of knew that there was still something lurking there. Like, I wasn't completely aligned with my soul and my truth, but I had this feeling like, well, I've worked this hard and I've worked for this long, so I should, my least favorite word in the English language, I should keep going. I've kind of reached this mountaintop, if you will, that everybody works so hard to achieve. And yet I had all of that, like, I ticked all of the boxes of success on the outside, and I felt incredibly empty on the inside. And I was like, what is that all about? And I felt really guilty, actually. I was like, how can I be in this place that so many people strive for, and yet I'm not feeling, it's not bringing me joy and fulfillment. Mm-hmm. And I ignored it and I ignored it. And then, as the universe does, kind of the universe and my soul conspired to rip me out of my sleep and start to kind of shake me. I always say, if you don't listen to your soul, it whispers to you. and then it shouts, and then
Mm.
it whacks you with a 2x4, right? And it's usually, is that crisis? Is it illness? In
Yeah.
my case, I'd had a lot of that before that I'd completely ignored. In this particular case, it was a nightmare that was ripping me out of my sleep and forcing me to realize that I was living a life that was completely out of alignment with my truth and my creative soul.
Mm-hmm. But for a lot of people, it's a little bit scary transition. We have responsibilities and families and bills to pay, and I think a lot of the times we get into places where we get to because we somewhat separate the means by which we earn money and our lifestyle. So when we talk, but that's my personal observation. I'm not sure if that's truth about the world, but what I've noticed that often people who are happy about their life, they're happy about how they get to spend their time and money. And then occasionally they are happy with how they earn that money. And in that case, they often don't have the time to spend that money because they love their work too much. So this separation of work and life is, I guess, why we sometimes wake up one day thinking that I have a life of my dreams, but I'm deeply unhappy. So how do you make this transition? Isn't that a bit scary? Because the life of your dreams, which you've built, it doesn't pay for itself. It requires some jobs, some salary. And for a lot of the people, the question is not that I don't know what to do, but they don't know how to make the transition exactly.
Yeah. Well, and this is so it took me a while. I mean, honestly, when I became aware of that truth, I already knew it. I mean, I think so often in our lives, exactly as you said, like we're pretending not to know our truth because it's super scary. And
Mm-hmm.
our truth is like, how can I make a living? With
Yeah.
that, with knowing what I'm really good at, with knowing what I truly want to do in this world. And it was scary for me as well. It took me was the final year at Harley. I was there for 6.5 years in total. It was the final year at Harley where I was having this nightmare, understanding the meaning of the nightmare, that what I was seeing was this proxy for my soul, and my soul was feeling malnourished and neglected and longing for attention. It took me about a good 6 to 8 months for me to kind of figure out, okay, what does this mean? Does this mean I want to leave? Does this mean I need a break? Does this
Mm-hmm.
mean I need to be doing something, some other kind of work in the corporate world? And I finally came to the perspective, or to the decision, that however scary it was, I was going to take a break.
Mm-hmm.
And my journey, which I called my Soulbbatical, because it was my time off to nurture my creative soul and see where that would lead me, I realized that my journey looked like leaving my job, because I was meant to go on this journey to find my calling and now do the work that I do in the world. But
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea that that's where it was leading me when I left. I literally said, I'm going to take some time off. At the time, I said, I'm going to take a year. I
Mm-hmm.
had gone through a really nasty divorce and a bunch of stuff. So I'd created this fund called the FU fund. I don't know if can I use that language here?
You can.
I created this FU fund where I was like, you know what? F you to the situation my divorce put me in. I made myself whole again with the work at Harley, and F you to anything less than total fulfillment in my life going forward. So that's one thing I would say to people, is like creating a little cushion for ourselves. But here's the reality. Soulbbatical actually doesn't mean that you have to leave your job. Soulbbatical is about finding yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And that was my big aha. I took a year off. I did some travel. In the middle of all of it, my dad had 2 massive strokes, and I had a big wake-up call about what I wanted to do with my, one wild and precious life, as Mary Oliver says. And I decided that I was going for it, and I was going to crystallize this vision around what I was really meant to do in the world, which led me to this work that I do. I say I'm on a mission to liberate 1 billion souls.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still scary every single day. I'm never going to tell anybody that it's not scary, because walking away from the only adult life that I'd ever known, with big titles and sexy brands and really good money, all of that, my identity was so tied up in all of that. So yeah, it's scary. I had to do a lot of work to really get back to my own self, my own self-worth, and understanding of who is Shelley Paxton, and how can I be the most iconic brand that I would ever represent? And I still do that work every day.
You know, I'll ask a little bit unfair question, my favorite type. Did you have the situation where you had to downgrade something about your life because you took this courageous step, where you had to, I don't know, stop flying business class, or sell that car you wanted to buy, or the house because you couldn't pay the mortgage? Did you have this experience when you did this transition, and how did you get through that? Because
I love this question.
You know why? Because we are so idealistic in our language, but when it comes to our own life, I know, because I'm like this. We are scared of little simple things, but I wanted this car and now I have to give it up and drive something simpler. And it seems like, oh, come on, that can't be the reason why but we are staying in status quo, which we don't like, because of simple, pathetic, everyday life.
Yeah, it's so, and I don't think it's an unfair question at all, Kristina. I love it, because I absolutely did. I was in a place before where I had a home in Chicago, but I was also living up in Milwaukee, which is where Harley is headquartered. I got rid of my place in Harley. I sold my motorcycle. I actually sold off a lot of my belongings, completely purged my closet, came back to the place that I own in Chicago, downsized here. So that was all in the first year, so that I knew I could, live a quality life. And there's a lot of privilege and good fortune that I've had in my life. So I'm not going to deny that at all. I want to be really honest about that. At the same time, it hasn't come without its sacrifices. Do I travel in a different way than I traveled before? Absolutely. I am a loyal Airbnb person now, because I was like, no, you don't stay in big fancy hotels. And what it realized, I feel like every time I make a decision like that may feel like a sacrifice in the beginning, it opens this door to incredible possibility. And now I'm like, why would I go back to staying at hotels? I love this. I'm deeply steeped. I meet the most amazing people who own these places that I stay in. I save a lot of money. I'm in the neighborhood and in the culture, no matter where I am in the world. And it's radically changed the way I travel. So those are a few examples, but yeah, my lifestyle's changed. And in a way, it's maybe at first I looked at it as downgrading. And in a way, I feel like I've upgraded my life because it's simpler.
Yeah, that's true. I like this idea of not considering downgrade it as downgraded, but simplifying. I've read it somewhere now. Of course, I wouldn't remember that. That's actually one of the things we should be doing, because there's this paradox that the more we earn, the more debt we create, and actually our salaries, as they grow, they don't make us any richer. So this simplification of life is sometimes it opens up so many opportunities for you in other ways. So thanks for this idea. I wanted to move a little bit in a different direction, because that's something which I started thinking of the first thing when I looked at your book. I do talk about business from time to time, but I have a funny approach to business. And I always explain that what I talk about is mostly for people who do business out of passion. But it's not the only type of business. There's business for investment. There is business which is typically purely making money. And it all has the space and at least in the contemporary world. What do you think is the future of business? Because what you teach seems to be closer to how I understand business. It's when you do what you love, and you get paid for that.
Yeah.
But that's not going to be probably the only kind of business. And what do you have any message for people who are in those old-fashioned branches of business, which are maybe a little soulless?
Yes, this is actually, so I think there are a few layers of this, right? So personally, I believe we have this opportunity to live lives that are more authentic, courageous, and purposeful. So that's kind of where my book starts. And that's where my personal journey started. And I try to keep myself honest to that. What I've realized along the way is that there's this bigger opportunity to bring soul back to business. I call it the soul of business. It might be my next book. I've been kind of turning on that. And here's what I think the opportunity is for all of us to kind of collectively say, we're moving in this direction. We want more fulfillment in our lives. And that means our whole lives. I agree with what you said earlier. Like our lives need to be more aligned instead of very disconnected. Like, oh, my personal life and the things I love are over here. And my business life and the things I do for money are over here. Mm-hmm. I'm a big advocate for saying, how do those both completely align with our values? So how are all facets of our lives completely aligned toward what really brings us joy and fulfillment? And then how do we bring that as leaders into the companies that we lead within, the companies that we founded, and rewrite the script of success? Mm-hmm. And that's now kind of the next wave of my Soulbbatical mission, is to say, how do we create cultures that are more wholehearted, more courageous, more humans first? So a great example of that is, here in the States, we're really bad at taking time off. Mm-hmm. It's like a payoff for hard work, and maybe people get 2 weeks a year. And I know this isn't the case everywhere around the world, but I see you shaking your head. You're like, it's ludicrous, right?
No, because just how you phrased it was so painful. It's like, it's a payoff for hard work. You have to earn it.
Yes. And so this is my thing. So this to me is also a pain point, makes me cringe, because I've spent most of my life traveling around the world and immersing myself in other cultures. And I'm like, why are we so backwards when it comes to this? And so my view of rewriting the script of success, there are many layers to it, but one of them is actually time off is a prerequisite for smart work. It's a prerequisite for us being the most fulfilled, productive, creative, innovative humans we can be. And as humans, we're at the center of business. We're at the center of innovation. And so how can we be operating at peak performance if we're not taking time off? If the idea of radical self-care isn't on the C-suite agenda? Right? Those are only two examples, but that to me is a way that I think we really are, I feel I'm being called to start to shift that conversation. So I kind of call it my rebel leadership principles, right? Like I want more of us rebelling for, who we are, what we want, and the impact we have in the world, and bringing that into our business and bringing that into business culture. So I call it being successful, because for so long in my corporate career, I felt success empty. And now I love this idea of marrying like success and fulfillment, and realizing that we can create cultures. Mind Valley is a great example of that. Mind Valley is a culture where it's like the human comes first. And then everything else is built around that. What a beautiful example for the rest of the world.
I really love the word you just mentioned, successful versus success empty. Is that your word?
Yeah.
You have to trademark it. It's really brilliant.
Oh, thank you.
So I want to ask, how do you bring soul to, let's say, classical business? Because we can speculate that people are going to value being in business with purpose more, but still business is taking the opportunity and solving people's problems. And there are such things as banks, for example, classical business. I'm asking this, and as I'm asking this, I just wanted to make a side note, because as you were talking, I remembered Richard Branson is actually very passionate about bringing humanity into business again, because when we were visiting him about a year ago, a little more, he was sharing actually this as his initiative. Of course, now after COVID, probably he's doing many more things. But a year ago, that was the passion of what he was doing, bringing humanity back into business. So I know at least one ally for you now.
I love that. Well, yeah, one little ally, right? It's like, that's amazing. I actually didn't realize that about him. I just love who he is and the work that he does in the world. And I think now it's more important than ever. So I really hope that he's still focused on that. So because the more of us, one of the other things I love to say is we're redefining ROI. And so he does this brilliantly. ROI no longer means return on investment, or I should say no longer only means return on investment, because that's always going to be important. But ROI now means ripples of impact.
Yeah.
And I think there's such an opportunity for more and more of us as we're headed in this direction to be those ripples that become those waves that drive that change in the world. So I'm super grateful and super hopeful that he's still on that mission, because people like me and so many others who are coming along and having this same kind of awakening, if you will, I think the more of us who are doing this, the more impact that we can have. And you're right to say, I mean, your question from earlier about, okay, so how does this happen in more classic, traditional, old world businesses? I don't profess to have the answer. I mean, I've written what I call my Rebel Leaders Manifesto, and I'm guessing that, somebody like Richard Branson is at the tip of the spear. Somebody like me is a little further back. I'm really looking at working with companies who are a little bit more progressive, who are probably more in the creative and the innovation, and probably the not limited to, but the technology space, where they're really rethinking their business. I mean, Salesforce is another great example where it's like mindfulness is brought into the company, and it's made a part of how they exist in the world and how they even think about their meetings. That's one small example of how we can really support the human in the business. I mean, I would love to see more leaders modeling what it looks like to really truly turn your technology off and not be texting and emailing people late at night and on the weekends, but model what does it mean to take care of yourself? What does it mean to really walk away from the screen, to be with your family or do your passion project or whatever it is? I want to see more of us modeling that, because I think it's all a part of this bringing humanity into business, as he says.
I can't avoid asking this question. Since this whole working at home situation has been going on for about half a year, across the world, some actually longer, because Chinese people started working at home earlier than than the rest of the world. How has this been affecting the public discourse on this topic? Because I'm sure you do listen to other people talking about that or expressing their feelings, or even just employees valuing new things now that there is new reality. How has this affected your work?
Yeah, I have to say, so first I'll say, what's been happening with this global pandemic, I mean, it is tragic. There's been a lot of loss. It's been hard to witness and be a part of. Thankfully, my family is healthy, but I've seen and experienced through friends and, and extended family, people who've had COVID and people who've lost people to COVID. So, my heart goes out to everyone. At the same time, there's a part of me that's a big part of me actually that says, you know what? We always learn something from a crisis. I think it was Winston Churchill who said, a crisis always teaches us something, comes to teach us something. And I'm a big believer that this is a huge inflection point in our lives, both individually and collectively. And so I've been really kind of jumping on this bandwagon to say, hey, this is getting us more clear on what matters most to us, because it slowed us down. I know busyness is an addiction, especially here in the US, but I know it's not limited to the US. And especially in the corporate world, busyness is this badge of honor. And I'm like, ditch that as a badge of honor. And I think COVID and working from home, we've had no choice but to slow down. We've had no choice to get more still. And I know it comes with its own kind of crazy, like, kids, online learning and all the things. Like, it definitely comes with its own crazy. I also think because we don't have the same commutes and all the same business dinners and all of that, that we have a little bit more space in our lives. So for me, what I've been talking about is this is our chance to slow down, get still, and really tune into that little voice. That little voice is our soul, and it's our GPS that will help us weather any storm. And I think a lot of us have been disconnected from that little voice, or trying to outrun it with our busyness. So to me, it starts there. Like, this is an opportunity to say, even if it's 10 minutes a day, to get still and get quiet and start tuning in. And I think a lot of people, so I've been on many calls with executives who have said, oh my God, Shelley, I now realize how important family time is to me, and how much I was taking that for granted, because 5 nights a week, I was going to business dinners. I was prioritizing clients over my own children. And now I'm home having dinner with my family 7 nights a week. And this is something that's never going to change again. Maybe 1 night a week, I'll say, okay, Wednesday nights can be my client night, or whatever that looks like. But I feel like there's been this kind of big awakening around this idea of what really matters to you, and how do you want to create your life going forward. I'm a big believer, like, Soulbbatical is all about, we create our lives, we don't live at the effect of them. And the old normal, if you want to use those terms, I don't love old normal and new normal, if I'm honest, but because I think people are speaking in those terms, the old normal wasn't perfect. We were doing a lot of things not well in our cultures and in our own lives, and kind of ignoring what really lights us up. So let's take this as an opportunity to create what really fulfills us, what will make us feel successful.
It's interesting that you mentioned that we are not going to go back to, well, that executive told you that he's not going back to, or she's not going back to taking 5 nights off. As I was, right before that, I was giving an interview to a friend of mine, and I mentioned this whole concept of hero's journey, which I actually learned from Brené Brown, who I know you're a student of. And she loves that, this whole idea that once you're out of the house, you won't get back. And as much as we want to go back to the old life, I know we are different. So what do you think is going to change? And I give you freedom to only comment on American corporate culture, because you guys don't understand rest at all.
No. And this is one of the big things I want to be an advocate for changing. So while a lot of my work is global, I think so much of the change can happen here. It's my home base. And I think it's where the most change is needed. Sorry, I just cut off your question.
No. I actually love that you did that, because I was getting somewhere. I'm very long-winded, so I don't mind at all. So what do you think Americans are not going to go back to after the world is back to?
Oh God, you and I could talk an hour about this at least. So I'm just thinking about what are my top things. I mean, honestly, so one of the things, and this is all, I don't have a crystal ball. This is my hope, and this is my work in the world, right? This is what I am out there every day preaching. This is what I am coaching my clients on. But I'm really a believer that, we have an opportunity, one, to slow down, exactly like I said. I think so much of it, I'm just going to recap some of what I've said and then see if anything else comes up while I'm talking, but slowing down, like this rat race that we're on, particularly here in the States and in the corporate world in the States, I think people are realizing, like, I'm exhausted. Right? And I'm not taking any time to resource and refuel and rejuvenate myself. So I think there's an understanding, a greater understanding around the value of that, and like, how can we create more of that going forward and demand it in our own lives and demand it in the cultures that we work within. One of the things I'm also working on right now is, what does it look like to bring this whole Soulbbatical concept into the corporate world?
Mm-hmm.
So that's another way of saying the soul of business. But literally, what if we said we work with companies to create, to one, support leaders in the organization to really create a life that is more fulfilling and to lead in a way that's more authentic, more courageous, more purposeful, and then allow them to take time off. And that means more than 2 weeks. That means maybe even taking off 3 months at a time, which is such a novel concept over here. I know that's not novel everywhere in the world, but what does it look like to say, actually, that's built in to the way that we do business. If you come work for X company, we are going to offer you a Soulbbatical, because we know that's a way to retain you. We know that's the way to get the best out of you when you're rested and, you know, rejuvenated, and you've been out in the world, like connecting ideas and connecting with yourself. So, I mean, those are only a few things. And I think on an individual level, I have had so many conversations with people who are saying, you know what? I'm just now realizing how miserable I am in my work. Because now it all happens in your house. Like, I'm used to working in my house because I run my own business, but that's only been 4 years. I left Harley exactly 4 years ago. And I think now people are in their house going, is this really what I want to do? And if not, I want to get clear on, how do I create more space for my passions? Because I believe we don't have to make this automatic transition to, okay, I'm going to leave everything and then go into this other thing and struggle to make money. I believe that, I call it like, our little p passions can lead to our big P purpose. And I think there's a lot of value there. Like, follow your passions, create more space in your life. And here's the other thing I would say. I believe that more and more of us are going to get rid of the things that drain our energy. It feels like there's this greater consciousness, and I think this is something global based on, you know, my network is all around the world. And what I'm hearing is people going, wow, I didn't realize how much I was, you know, shoulding all over myself, right? I should do this. I should do this. Like, we do so much out of guilt and obligation. So I'm really encouraging people to say, get clear on what sucks your energy. You know, what are the soul sucks and what are the soul fuels? What gives you energy? And start pruning those things that are draining your energy now, as we're starting to come out of this, and create your life around those things that bring you energy.
I'll definitely ask you about some practical ideas, because I have some examples of real humans in my life who I know would ask questions about how do you do it practically. But first I want to ask this. I know that in US, this whole concept of you taking time off for life is almost alien. Even the fact that young mothers in US have to go back to work very early. And when we were getting married 17 years ago, Vishen was still working in a company in US then, and he got fired for taking 2 weeks off for the wedding and honeymoon. On the other hand, I have one of my key people going into maternity leave soon again. I don't feel that I'm losing her. I know that she'll be gone for a while, but and right now I'm talking as an employer, as a person who has a team, who finds people. I know for a fact that, because that's what I have experienced, that there are some people who, if they have to take time off, I have to wait for them to come back, because they are, I wouldn't say completely irreplaceable, but they are of value to me, of enough value for me to want to keep them still. So how, as an employer, I understand approximately what you're talking about. But as an employee, it's still scary to come and say, hey, I'm burnt out. I need to take a few months off to just not even report to you what I'm going to do. Maybe I'll be just lying in bed and licking my wounds. But people need that In Europe, we are talking about, not in Europe, actually in the US, I think that the theme of taking time off for mental health needs is coming up. And even the list of excuses why we can take time off is getting shorter. Just as an example, in Europe, when you take a maternity leave, you're allowed to be out of work for 1.5 years, and the employer has to take you back, and you will be paid this whole time. In US, moms get back to work before 2 months over, right?
It's 8 to 12 weeks.
The baby shouldn't be even off the nursing at that time, but moms have to go back. Do you have any suggestions to people who are not masters of their own life, who do work for someone, and while they might understand the need for that, but their bosses might not? And in US, where why I'm asking this is because it's hard to demand your rights in the society where the system is still different. And while you might understand that you're right, the system can roll over you and kill you. Is there any advice for people who are in this kind of situation?
Oh, so I want to hit on a couple of things you said as a way to answer this question, because it literally I have goosebumps from head to toe, because what you're talking about now is what I am so passionate about. So first, the whole topic of mental health. I mean, even before COVID, it's like suicide rates are skyrocketing, depression rates are skyrocketing. Even in my own book, part of my story is my own mental health journey, my own attempt to take my own life 12 years ago, feeling like I couldn't see the hope. And on the outside, I was this super successful executive. And on the inside, I was like, I don't even know how to ask for help. And so I'm a huge mental health advocate. And so that's part of the reason why I'm on this journey, because it's not just a conversation about physical well-being. It's a conversation about physical and mental well-being. So thank you for bringing that up. It's actually the 10% of the proceeds of my book go to an organization called Life is Priceless Foundation, which supports mental health research and awareness and suicide prevention. So this is a big thing for me, because I often think it's like without those support structures, a lot of us don't even know how to ask for help. Mm-hmm. And we kind of spiral into that very dark place, and we can't see that there are people there who are willing to help us, who want to help us, and there are support structures. So thank you for saying that piece. I think the other thing for me is, you said something else that really sparked for me. The other thing for me is it's hard to have the conversation with our organizations, because, and this is why I think as leaders, we need to flip this script. We need to normalize. So I'm going to start with the leaders and then go to the employees, right? Who are also leaders, right? I don't like even making that distinction. We're all leaders. So starting with the leaders of the company. So you, for example, how can we normalize the conversation? I actually think this is one of our biggest opportunities around the world, and especially here in the States, to normalize the conversation, so that a conversation around taking a sabbatical or a soulbbatical or whatever you want to call your time off isn't the result of crisis, illness, tragedy, because that's what it is right now. I was just reading this study on by a guy who leads a mission called the Soulbbatical Project. Amazing guy. He's done a TEDx talk on it. And his research basically rewrote everything that I wrote, or was very aligned with everything I wrote in my book, which is, we don't have this conversation until we're forced to have this conversation. So how do we as leaders and high profile people in the world start to wave that flag to say, this is the conversation we need to be having. It's abnormal to wait until something bad happens in your life. We really need to be having this on the front end and asking our employees, what do you need? Right? What do you need to perform at the level that I'm expecting you to perform at, to do what we need you to do in this organization? So I think one of the biggest missions is, again, to like make that conversation, normalize the conversation, make it so that it's not the anomaly, but it's actually the rule. That those are the conversations we have when we engage in employment with each other. And those are the conditions that we create for our people. So then it's not difficult for our people to come to us and say, well, ideally our people wouldn't even have to come to us and say, I'm feeling burnt out, because we've created the culture and the conditions for them not to burn out, for them to create that space and that time off in their lives to refuel themselves. But I honestly, in cultures where that's not yet happening and it's a difficult conversation to have, I am an advocate that we've got to look out for our own needs. So here's an example. One of the things I talk about in my book is when I was 26 years old, I was in the advertising business here in the States, and I was really kind of struggling. My whole world had become my job. It was like 24/7. I was living and breathing. My friends were the only real friends I had were people who were in the same industry, because they could understand my life and we spent so much time together. And I saw somebody who was a good friend of mine go to management in the company and ask for a 5-month sabbatical, time off, because he really wanted to reconnect with himself. And he felt really passionately about traveling Africa, literally from London all the way down to the tip of Africa, and going on this very soul nurturing journey. And I remember looking at him going, wait, what? You can have that conversation? And I think we forget how to break the rules. And I think you have a program around this right now too, don't you? Learning to like write the rules of your life.
Yes.
So I'm super, like, you and I are of one mindset on this. I think that's one of the things that we have to remind ourselves, that there are a lot of unwritten rules that we are holding ourselves accountable to, and why. And what are the new rules that we want to write in our lives? And I'll never forget, that was my first moment where I was like, how am I a rebel? And I forgot how to break the rules, you know? And ever since then, I'm like, okay, when I come up against something, I say, is this an unwritten rule that I'm following? Why? Where did it come from? What's the limiting belief behind it? And what's the new rule that I want to write? And I think we have to ask ourselves that in our lives, and we have to ask for the hard thing. We have to ask for what we want.
So it's good that you just mentioned rules, because I was planning to ask this anyway. So there is this belief that success comes with hard work, to the point that if we reach success without struggle, without sweat and blood, we think it's fake, it's not sustainable, it's not earned, and all sorts of funny things. And US, I heard the phrase 24/7 in US for the first time in my life, especially, and of course it was applied to work, which was absolutely terrifying to me. But just an example, US is not unique in that. This belief is true all over the world. Just as an example from my own life, I was once speaking in Russia at a huge business event. It was a few thousand people. There were incredible speakers there, like, very successful. And they asked me to talk about meditation and slowing down to reach success in business. I guess it was only me and one Buddhist monk who, of all the speakers, were talking on this topic. Out of I don't know how many, like 50 speakers.
But I'm so glad you were.
Well, I'm glad I said yes, but I did the classical thing. I went on stage looking like a girl, as I do, and explaining how sometimes to reach success you have to slow down and you have to meditate and think what you want in your life and all of that. And when I was done, a lady from the audience asked me in a very funny tone, she's like, did you earn your first million already? Ooh. And yes, and I was so shocked I didn't know what to say to that, because it was ridiculous. For those who don't know me, I don't think people don't know, those who will be listening mostly know me, but for those who don't know me, my first million was so many years ago, I don't even remember when it was. So it was a ridiculous question, of course. But my point is that our society, and this is something which which we believe so earnestly that I can't even blame people for thinking so. But we equate success to hard work, and that's why you hear amazing people saying such damaging things like, all the successful people wake up at 5 in the morning, you can't afford sleeping, while you're sleeping people are earning money, and all of this, no pain, no gain. And it's true in certain contexts, but it's not always like this. So we are in this dead end of constantly banging our head on the brick wall, which is symbolically right behind you.
Exactly, right here. No head banging going on here, though.
Your forehead is in the opposite direction, so it's fine.
That's it.
But it's so deeply ingrained in us that I heard entrepreneur women saying, I feel guilty when I have free time. I feel like I'm not doing something. I should be doing something. Should, your favorite word. So what do you do with that belief? How do we need to change it? Because what you're talking about is so contradictory to the idea that you have to gain things with sweat, blood, and hard work, and waking up early and not taking time off 24/7, and all of that we romanticize to the point that even movies don't ever show another picture.
Yeah, it's so true. Well, so first of all, I just have to say, you and I, like, you're such a kindred soul. Like, thank you for saying all that and for being one of these voices out in the world who's spreading this message. I mean, slowly but surely, we are going to help people understand that this is the way. I am so aligned with everything that you just said. And it's only been 4 years. So when I think about 26 years in the corporate world, all I was ever taught was like, work hard, work hard, work hard. Like this idea of work smart, this idea of slow down to speed up, which is what my coach, Rich Lippin, says. Mm-hmm. And I love it. He was the very first person who said that to me. I started working with him shortly after I left the corporate world. And I was like, slow down to speed up. What? Like, that's so contradictory. It makes no sense to me. How could that get me anywhere? And what I started to realize is that you know this, you live this, and you speak this into the world. Slowing down is about the being. It's about, who do I want to be and how am I showing up in the world? It's about the protecting of our energy. It's about the refueling of our energy. All of that is so crucial to getting done what we want to get done in the world. I now, with creating more space in my life, get more done in the span of 3 hours than I did in a 12-hour day in my corporate life. I know that to be a fact. And so I think it's shifting. What are these metrics of success, right? Because all the things that you just talked about, like that hustle and that grind and those words, they make my hair stand on end. That, to me, that all leads to burnout. Hustle and grind and 5 a.m. and, burning the candle at both ends. I mean, all of those things, I'm like, well, that's exhausting. That's wearing down who we are, because it's placing our entire value as humans on the doing part. Not on the being part. Mm-hmm. And so I believe this, to me, this is part of this shift that we're talking about. This is part of the soul of business. How do we start to put metrics around not just productivity, because that's where all the metrics lie today, but metrics around, well, productivity can be looked at in many different ways. I think a part of productivity is this being part. How are we taking the time for ourselves? How are we getting in touch with ourselves? How are we giving ourselves space to even make those connections and have those ideas and reflect on what's working and what's not working and what we want to create going forward? That all only happens when we create space. It only happens when we slow down and when we sit still and when we meditate. So I think this is a massive cultural shift that we have to drive. To me, it's part of what you said, Richard Branson calls bringing the humanity back to business. And what I call the soul of business, that has that has so much to do with it. It's like we have to remind ourselves that business is human, because business doesn't happen without us. And if we're not taking care of us, how can it happen? And that's why I think we see burnout happening so regularly. It's scary because I think we're prioritizing, well, I shouldn't say prioritizing, we're looking at productivity through the wrong lens.
So I also believe that it's sometimes hard to change something which has already been formed. I tend to say that to startup people that the advice that I sometimes, when I talk about business, they would say, oh, it's good if you have a business already, but I'm just starting up. It's just me. I can't afford that. And I usually mention that the things don't change after a time. You started in a certain way, and that's how it's going to be, but on a different scale. And for employees, it's the same. If you are used to filling your days with meetings back to back, if you have no time to focus, if you catch up on your work after dinner, because that's the only time, it's not going to change unless something dramatic happens, maybe like a lockdown. Yeah. Do you have, apart from the lockdown, not everybody's in lockdown anymore, and a lot of people have found themselves in the new hamster's wheel in the context of the lockdown. Do you have any suggestion to people who are in this in this matrix already, and how to get out of it? Because once you're there, it's not easy to just break free.
Yeah, it's not easy at all. And so, I love that you say that, because I come from, like, I am a creature of that habit and that experience. And I lived on that hamster wheel, or many versions of that hamster wheel, for a very, very long time. So I appreciate that that's sort of the way that we've been conditioned. I love that, Glennon Doyle talks about, we've been tamed, we've been conditioned. And this is all about unconditioning ourselves. And it's hard work, because in unconditioning ourselves, we have to train others how to treat us. And that, to me, is the hardest thing, because it's all around setting boundaries. So when we think about, usually something that's happening in your life where you're feeling frustration, or you're feeling some resentment, well, why does my boss always call me at 7:00 at night? Why does anybody think it's okay to, call me for business on a Sunday? And then we have to kind of step back and say, well, how am I creating that? And this is the hard part. This. I know you know this, and probably have practiced this. But the hard part is for us to say, what's been my part in creating that? And how can I start to create or erect the boundaries that are going to say, no, you know what? That's not okay. Because boundaries are simply what's okay and what's not okay. And when we look at how we're training other people, because when we get those calls on Sundays and we get those late night emails or texts and we're responding to them, we're saying that it's okay.
Yes.
Right? So now it's like, and I get it, this is hard. And this is where this is where all my Brene Brown training comes in, right? Like, it takes a lot of courage and vulnerability to say, no, you know what? After whatever time, let's say after 5 p.m. on weekdays, it's my time. It's my family time. I'm not available unless it is a true crisis. Right? I think everything's become a crisis in our world, especially in business. It's like, well, this is urgent. This is urgent. This is urgent. And like the important stuff actually starts to fall below the urgent stuff.
Yeah.
And so if we really stick to that, I think saying, hey, here are my boundaries. It's not okay unless the world is truly on fire to, text me or call me after 5 p.m. or on the weekends. That's a really simple example, but for anybody who's watching this, think about what are those things that you feel kind of that resentment and that frustration around, and then start to peel it back and say, okay, how am I creating it? What boundaries have slipped? What new boundaries or rules do I want to create in its place? That, to me, is one of the simplest place to start. And when I say it's simple, I don't mean it's easy, because I know it's not easy, but it is a simple place to start to understand, how do I retrain people to understand how I want to be treated, and when I'm going to be responsive and when I'm not going to be responsive.
Thank you so much for that. And before we finish, I want to ask one question. It's usually a parting message. And this time it would be like this. What is the most important rule for your soul at work? Something that you could share, and other people might be willing to adopt as well. So let's say a scenario where you would have to create a new work environment for yourself. What would be this one thing that is absolutely the most important for your soul and something you would stand for?
So my whole message is all around authenticity. You've heard me say it a couple times already. And my line is, authenticity is the truest form of rebellion. And that to me is like my love note to the world. I really want everybody to let that sink in and say, how does that apply to my life? Like, what would change? So maybe this is my parting thought related to that. What would change in your life right now if you were living 100% true to yourself?
Oh my God, that life could totally crumble into pieces, you know.
Again, not easy. Not easy.
No, I'm speaking from experience. I did that 2 years ago.
Yeah. I believe me, I understand exactly like your journey. We have a lot of similarities in our journey. And it also opens, it just opens these portals to new possibilities. But it's really scary when it's happening. It's really scary to acknowledge those things. And so I believe the more authentic we can be to who we are, what we want, and the impact we have in the world, and rebel for that in every aspect of our lives, not just in our work. Oh man, that's a world I want to live in.
Thank you so much, Shelley. And traditionally, for those who are going to be watching later, I know you're watching later, but you still have to do that. I want to ask you guys to leave a heart for my guest, for being...
And I'm leaving a heart for them.
Yeah, probably people who will watch it will have to leave it in the comments somewhere or in likes. So please share your love with my beautiful, amazing, such a warm guest, Shelley Paxton. Thank you so much for finding time to speak with me and for being so open and so warm and so passionate. And I hope that it will be our generation that will see the change across the world in that culture, and we'll get to live, not just work. Or let's say we'll get to work and live, and not live for the sake of work.
I always say the business of living, right? So many of us have been living business for so long. What would it feel like to shift to the business of living?
Oh yeah.
How powerful is that?
So thank you so much, and see you guys next week. Bye.